Yes, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For water shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away.
Yeah, it's. Love this chapter because, everyone who thinks that prophets only did doom and gloom. This is this really flies in the face of that.
Yeah.
It is a promise, promise of abundant joy.
Mhm.
Good morning, how are you? Good.
So
Yeah, and how refreshing that would have been when they were in captivity to hear these words that
Mhm.
there will be a straight, uncomplicated path to joy. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is so incongruent, I guess, is that we could have that now. And because we let the jerks of this world upset us and, get us off the path we know we should travel. We don't have that joy.
Yeah, this highway is a little exclusive. The unclean shall not travel on it. Which, like, if you remember, like, we all go through, like, in my limited understanding of their traditions, like, everybody was unclean at some point, but then there was these, like, cleansing things you did to become clean again. They're like, no, unclean, kicked off the highway, that's a little exclusive.
Yeah.
But Jesus brings the good news and opens up the highway, I would say.
Yeah.
That Jesus opens up the highway for even the unclean.
And they kept putting more rules as to what was unclean. It's just, well, I'm sure he wanted to include this, and I'm sure he would want to include that.
Mhm.
But I think and this may sound crazy but the word of hope is in that final line that says, even if they are fools, they shall not go astray.
Mhm.
Even in our most foolish moments, God is there for us. That we may not know. And that's what what they say is what Isaiah is referring to as fools, is people who don't know the the holiness code. Those who don't know all the laws that have been written. Those are because they would be by the powers that be, by the leaders of Judah, they would be considered fools.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
yeah, well, maybe, yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, like. The unclean shall not travel, but no one will ever be considered unclean.
right, I mean, it's fool,
Yeah.
and and
And maybe
how
they
difficult it
also
is
missed the
to make
mark,
that.
and that's why Jesus had to come, be like, no,
Mhm.
you got stuck on this unclean thing, but we were trying to tell you that it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how hard it is to admit we don't know.
Yeah,
We don't know, and that we want to. I mean, and that's the whole idea behind the law is if you know the law, you'll keep, but no, we don't know all those. We don't know all the ways of God. We can't. And I think that's. Isaiah does a great job. I mean, not only here, but other places of expressing that. And that's, I think, why he's considered one of the major prophets, one of the great prophets. The other thing I was thinking about as I read this yesterday and thought about is it speaks because when we get to the gospel and talk about the gospel and the greatness of John, Jesus talks about the greatness of John, that to think about the greatness of Isaiah, that there were people there were people writing, people speaking, whatever, for over 100 years, speaking in the name of Isaiah, because he had that kind of reputation. He had that, he was someone that people listened to, and so when Jesus says that, later in the gospel says, John is greater than all the prophets. That's really when you think about
Lifting up pretty
Samuel and you think about Samuel and Isaiah. I mean, these are people who really had the respect of and were, I guess the word we'd use today, were idolized in a sense by the people of Israel.
yeah. Morning.
Good morning, sir.
Morning. Sorry, it's one of the things I had to attend to.
No problem.
So,
The other thing that helps like understand why this is in this Sunday's readings that relates to the other text, verse 5 and 6 is sort of setting up a benchmark. Like things that God will do. And that's sort of a common theme for all these readings of eyes of the blind should be open, the ears of the deaf would stop, the lame shall leap like deer, the tongue of the speechless sing. And then, there's multiple throughout metaphors of water in the desert. But yeah, these are the promises. God is here when these things happen. Which I think you could argue like we're talking about Jesus, but also are talking about the presence of God, when because these things still happen in a variety of ways. How do we recognize God in our lives?
and I would, and if you're talking about that, I was just over in eastern Iowa, and on the shores of the Mississippi, and seen reports about how low them, but it is just amazing. Even as far north as Europe. By McGregor, Prairie du Chien, and I've in the years I have seen, been by the Mississippi, I've never seen it like this. It's just incredible. And so, and we're seeing the value of when Isaiah, I mean, these were people that were used to living without a lot of water. And so it really, when you live without it, or you can't, you really see the value of it. These metaphors, whatever you want to call them, really speak to you. So
Need to invest our money because I think water is gonna be the greatest and precious resource,
yeah, yep.
especially with
It is.
everybody wanting to live in the desert.
Yeah.
But should we move on to the psalm?
Psalm, yep.
Happy are they who have the God of Jacob for their help, whose hope is in the Lord their God, who made heaven and earth, the seas, and all that is in them, who keeps promises forever, who gives justice to those who are oppressed, and food to those who hunger. The Lord sets the captives free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord cares for the stranger. The Lord sustains the orphan and widow, but frustrates the way of the wicked. The Lord shall reign forever. Your God, O Zion, throughout all generations. Hallelujah. He's with not only us, but everybody else cares about him, and he was there, he is there, and he will be there.
Yep.
Another very hopeful passage.
Yeah. And it's based on actions, not, not sitting in some place and expounding on our knowledge and our beliefs. It is based on action, on really what this is God at work.
Justice for the oppressed, food to those who hunger, setting captives free, opening eyes of the blind, lifting up those who are bound down, caring for the stranger, sustaining the orphan and widow. Yeah.
So I think, in our support of Table Grace, and I don't know if you noticed, you were busy conducting worship, Chris. I don't know if you noticed how much Matt was the young man that was outside of Table Grace with his little dog, his little terrier, and Matt went out, invited him in, wanted him to come in, and he refused, and so he said no, and
I'm the one that told Matt that he was out there, so.
is that right? And so Matt ended up taking food out to him and took a dinner out to him, and eventually the young man came in with his little terrier, and it was he was, I don't know if he was just so excited about getting communion. He was, and it was obvious he had some mental disorder, behavioral disorder, going on. Yeah, he was
drunk.
Was he drunk?
Yeah. He was drunk.
At, 1 PM, but. Well, that's a disorder, substance abuse disorder, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And.
His dog was well behaved though.
Yes, he was. And I obviously had no, I don't know where he was staying, but the other thing that he, it was interesting is I got such a kick out of it was that when did the traditional at Table Grace, we just open prayers up for the people. When we do the prayers of the people, we open it up to let everybody even pray. And he didn't exactly say it this way, but it was like what I heard was, he goes, we pray good. Yeah,
He was drunk.
but in the midst of his, in drunkenness, whatever, he still
Participated.
recognized and recognized the goodness of what was going on around him, and I think that's that's the part of it we often overlook is that it's in that action that that people see
Well, the Holy
God's
Spirit was still
mercy
at work.
Yeah, see God's mercy at work. So. Someone want to read from Luther's favorite letter?
Yeah.
Is it actually his favorite? Or are you being sarcastic?
No, he doesn't like it.
Be
Be patient.
I was being facetious. That's a-
Be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious crop from the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also must be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near. Beloved, do not grumble against one another, so that you may not be judged. See, the judge is standing at the doors. As an example of suffering and patience, beloved, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. I don't know why they don't continue the reading all the way through the end of the 12.
And is this James, one of the early apostles, or James, the brother of Christ?
Brother of Jesus, who became leader of the church in Jerusalem, martyred during the years before the outbreak of the Jewish War,
It says 62 AD.
66 to 70.
Oh, okay. Oh, I have
So a little bit, so a
52.
couple years later.
But many scholars see this work as a later author who was dedicating the letter.
I think that's probably right. I mean, we don't know much about James, the brother of Jesus, but I doubt he was educated enough to write in Greek, would be my question. So it's probably the letters dedicated and used his name. But again, theme of patience. Which just kind of chaps my hide. Cause I'm so impatient. I think it's hard to be patient, right?
Mhm.
Maybe our patience in the basketball team is paying off.
Yeah, only.
Well, yeah, I was wondering about you. Who were you rooting for? Both of them?
Yeah, I was probably rooting for Creighton because I thought that they could maybe go a long way this year, but I'm happy to see Nebraska win.
Yeah.
And, but did Luther not like the whole book or just the faith and deeds portion?
Well, I
He's
think
dealing with
that's,
grace.
yeah, right. Yeah, he thought that it was a little bit too legalistic in its approach to the gospel. Would be my explanation, but. You know, I think be patient, patience and faith go hand in hand. I think being faithful has an element of patience to it because. Patience also. Helps us to realize that we're not the ones in control, that we're waiting for something else to happen that's beyond what we ourselves have control over. Unless it's patience with ourselves, and maybe that's a different thing, but.
Yeah.
I think like waiting and not seeing the instant results that we are expecting or wanting doesn't mean that we have to like sit there and do nothing. Like waiting doesn't have to mean inaction. It just means like knowing that the end result, like, you know, maybe we don't even see it, but we are helping to build it. Yeah, because the prophets, they keep pointing to the prophets like, oh, look at the prophets. They were so patient. Like the prophets weren't patient. They were often, as you said, Pastor Lynn, very fire and brimstone. They're like, we have to do this now. It is urgent. But, you know, I think they all eventually understood, as any, you know, leader of whatever, any leader has to learn that change takes a long time and you keep chipping away at it. It's not instant.
The verse 8, strengthen your hearts for the coming of the Lord is near. I mean, that's got to be the hinge upon which this reading. You know. I think it takes patience to realize that God is with us, and it doesn't seem like God is with us.
Yeah.
I was, you know, I just remind myself, you know. The trouble I would be in if God wasn't patient with me.
I was thinking the exact same thing.
That's scary, huh? Oh, no. What?
Praise God, he gave me enough time.
Wait a second, before I worry about God, I worry about my wife.
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but. We've got a gracious God, I know that. Wife's she's got a arm reach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think about just, you know. Having children. And just how. You know, I can remember. You know, trying to potty train them, for example, and. Just how much patience it took to get that to happen, and now it just seems like. It just seems like that was yesterday, and now they're. If you told them those stories now, they would walk away because they don't want to hear them.
Yeah, but now they're really in the stage you want to kill them.
Yeah.
They're teenagers. You know,
Every once in a while.
yeah, they're growing up. They're trying to see who they are and where they're going and,
Testing their boundaries.
yes,
Yeah.
that's what,
Boundaries that I've had to learn, so why shouldn't I be patient?
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. That's
Well,
what-
and
When
that
Cindy
whole-
and I got married, I was a single parent of teenagers. And
Mm.
she said, we need to have babies. I said, no, look what they turn into.
Mm,
And you had,
Guess who won that battle?
Yeah.
you had Eddie and Lauren.
Yeah,
Yeah, but just parenting, knowing that, you know, you're responsible for the upbringing of these children. I wonder if God, you know, like you said, God is patient with us. God feels responsible for our well-being and our salvation.
Yeah, yeah, when I look, and now I look at, you know, the job our two daughters are doing, raising. You know, raising their children and. You know, they have. They're very clear about boundaries, which is, to me, you know, that whole. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Yeah. That's where you see a lot of. Well, the work I did with adolescents, that was often the case, you know, was they didn't know what real boundaries were.
Yeah, that's sad.
Because, well,
Didn't have any parents. They probably didn't have,
well,
or if they did, they were,
50% of their parents were also addicts, and so
they just tore it
addicts
apart.
are notorious for not respecting boundaries, not knowing boundaries. And so, yeah, they had no one to teach them what good boundaries.
yeah, but even parents who don't have addiction problems or, you know, want to be their children's friends.
Right.
And you have to set boundaries. God
Right.
sets boundaries for us.
That's right.
And, you know, kids, if they don't have any boundaries, they don't think they're loved. You know, no, you don't care enough about me to have me come home at 10 o'clock, or you don't
Right.
care what I do. It, especially teenagers, I can remember when I was a teenager, I used to lie about the fact that I had boundaries to my friends. And I asked my parents about it. He says, well, we trusted you. It's okay. I know the dumb. I know you trusted me, but I didn't think you loved me because you didn't give me any rules.
Just being. As we enter in the Advent theme of patience, it seems like that makes a lot of sense, right? How we're patient for God to do something new in our lives.
Mhm.
Sometimes I think we need reminders that God will be doing something new, but it just seems like it's taking forever.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and,
Well, and I think the other part of patience and just sitting in silence is we aren't open, we aren't going to recognize the new if we aren't willing to listen.
yeah,
We got to be willing to listen and open our
And
eyes,
see.
our hearts, our ears to what is new.
right,
Otherwise, we aren't even going to recognize it
yeah,
because it's going to seem very strange to us.
yeah. We, in confirmation last week, we were doing the Lord's Prayer and talking about the is and will be, or whatever that.
The here but not
statement-
yet.
Yeah, like Advent is the season where we're waiting for Jesus and we're waiting for God, but we also know that God is already here. So this patience, like waiting for future coming, but also patiently seeking out God's work that's already happening. And in light of these, like, I don't know, benchmark is a harsh word, from the Psalm and from Isaiah about like, how do you know God is here? Like those things are happening, not at the scale that, you know, we want them to be, but how do we? Yeah, I think patience doesn't necessarily mean contentment, right? It
Mhm.
means continually saying, these are the things that mean God is here, and I know that God is here, so let's be doing those things.
Mhm.
That within that weird space of like, we're waiting, but we also know that God is already here at the same time.
It's kind of like, you all know the story about the man in the flooded house that, says, oh no, God will take care of me.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, he will.
Because we're waiting for God to come back, we just think about all the gifts that he gives us and all the things and opportunities that he's giving us now.
Mhm.
And
Every breath that we breathe is an opportunity.
Mhm.
that's part of my morning prayers. Thank you for the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and the food that we eat. I mean, he gives us those basics in some way or another. And as long as we're breathing, we have an opportunity. So
Sounds like a good transition to Matthew.
yeah,
All right. When John heard in prison that what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, and the dead raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal places. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly, I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he."
this passage has always bothered me. And I get at it. John knew who Jesus was, and when John baptized Jesus, he told everybody who Jesus was.
But he asks still.
But he asks, and does he do that so that his followers will know?
Like, is it a rhetorical ask or is it a true question? Is that kind of?
Right, yeah.
Well, so much of John's message was about repentance. That was, last week. Right before the baptism of Jesus. And so I could see him, he's in prison, which is, dark time. Eventually he is killed, right? So he's in this place of darkness and potentially doubt. I could also see it as a teaching thing, but he's looking, he's like, I'm suffering here in prison. Let's make sure this is the right guy, because he's not doing what I thought it would look like.
Yeah.
Right. People did not recognize Jesus because it was so different than what they were expecting. And I think John was maybe among those that was like, let's be sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's an opportunity for sure for Jesus to define who he is beyond what John is proclaiming he is. So in Matthew's gospel, it's interesting because he starts off with saying, "Go and tell John what you see, hear, and see. The blind receive their sight and the lame walk." Well, Matthew's gospel was written to an early Jewish community, and that early Jewish community would have recognized King David as. They're the one who they thought was gonna be the kind of Messiah that was gonna come back but the problem with that is King David, what is the first thing he did when he came into Jerusalem? He killed the blind and the lame. So what does Jesus say? The very first thing he uses to define who he is the healer of the blind and the lame. So it's this reversal of expectations. So John's question sets up this tension between the early Jewish community's understanding of who Jesus is, the Messiah, it truly is. So that community was wrestling with messianic promise. And so this is, I think, really hones in and defines who Jesus is as a spiritual Messiah, not a political one. So that doesn't answer your question, Rod, but I think the question is well placed. I would tend to say, well, maybe John had some doubts. And that's okay, because don't we all?
Yeah.
You know, is this really what's happening?
Yeah.
Is Nebraska really winning this basketball game?
Well, and, you know, John knew who Jesus was probably from early on in his life, and he's, waiting for him to, for it to be Jesus's time. And then he baptizes them and they say, okay, this is it. Then wait, why are you letting me stay here in prison? Why, you're supposed to be the savior. And so I could see some doubts where he's being in prison, maybe being mistreated, whatever, but he's no longer free. And it seemed like his life was free out in the desert, roaming. And so being in prison for him was probably doubly, a double penalty.
Well, yeah, and the whole premise for him being in prison was him proclaiming this king that isn't behaving like a king. So they put him in prison, and he's probably thinking to himself, well, this isn't what Isaiah was telling me. This is what I was supposed to be doing. Why am I in prison? I mean, he's probably sitting there with a little bit of resentment.
Well, he also said that the king was a jerk.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, he did.
Herod probably wasn't very happy with him when he's saying bad things about him. So.
Well, Herod was more intrigued by, Herodias, his wife was one that was really unhappy with John.
Herodias.
Yeah. She did not want.
Yeah, because
But
she was the one that he was picking on more than.
Right,
Well, John called her out on.
Yeah,
right. But
you're a bad woman.
yeah, but and they don't include that, like you say the verses 12 through 19, but I think 18 and 19 of the one, he talks about the violence that preceded John, and that has been a part of the people of Israel, the nations of Israel. They've known this violence for centuries. And then he says, for John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he is a demon. The Son of Man comes eating and drinking, and they say, look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And then I love this line, yet wisdom is justified by her deeds. The wisdom that, and I'm sure, or it just says Jesus referring to the wisdom, that comes from God. That
It's not what he says, it's what he does.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So judge us judge us by our actions and, you know, I mean, it got to be a cliche during the 60s, 70s when we were singing, you know, they will know we are Christians by our love, but it's, you know, the acts. The acts of mercy, the acts of kindness, the acts of compassion, the acts of forgiveness, healing. You know, all of that is part of wisdom, part of you know, understanding who God is in our lives. So
Yeah.
I forgot.
Well,
I got out at 11 o'clock at
Oh,
St. Tim's.
Okay.
So I gotta run.
but
I'll talk to you later. Okay, see you.
yeah, all of these things that God will do, Jesus is saying, see, I am doing them.
Right.
Like, this is how, yes, I am the Messiah because I'm doing these things that you know was foretold that I would do. But, yeah. What do you think verse 6 means? And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me.
I think. Verse 19 answers that, 18 and 19 answer that.
Yeah.
I think the question, are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another, is not just John's question, but it's our question. I think the fact that John asks that question gives us permission to ask that question, like, well, somebody like John can ask it, well, is this what God looks like? You know, is this a divine moment? You know, those times in our life when maybe there's been blessings in disguise, or when we didn't recognize God at first, but maybe in hindsight look back and say, well, God was there, part of that. You know, what does God's presence look like? And I think that's a key question for us in faith.
Well, it's. You wonder why, if Jesus is nobody, you know, if Jesus was a crazy fool, why does he scare the Jews and the Muslims so much? You know, well, why are the Muslims so afraid of, you know, their Islamic people encountering Christians and, you know, maybe becoming a Christian, that they, you know, that they have to kill them if they, you know, change religions? What? You know,
I think for the radicals, I mean, I think they order their society through legalistic means, and they adopt the legalism that's in that religion to maintain order.
mhm.
And what does Jesus offer? He offers freedom and grace and death. I mean, to someone who's trying to organize a society legalistically, Jesus looks like anarchy. I mean, so I mean, maybe that's part of it.
Yeah,
And we don't see it as anarchy, but we see it as freedom.
Mhm.
yeah. Or that grace, you know, like true grace can be offensive. Right? That,
Yeah,
well, I worked really hard. What do you mean they just get it for free? You know? Yeah, and I think especially when a whole society or your whole way of life is built around this, these rules, and then for someone to come in and say, the rules don't matter. That could be offensive.
Well, rules matter, but there's civil law and then there's,
Well, yeah,
God's law, and our law is love your neighbor and love God. And that's what happens after you say you believe, not to get to believe.
Right.
So, but for dangerous talking about a religion I don't know as much as I know about Christianity. But when you order your religion based on a checklist of things to do and don't do, you live by that, and your value is worth only as much as you adhere to this checklist. And that to me is, I wouldn't want to live like that. Because I know I'm not going to be able to fulfill all of the terms of that checklist. So I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a threat to, but all those Muslim societies, their governments are adhered to, they're either Shiite or Sunni. And the Shiites and Sunnis don't get along.
They hate each other too.
So,
Yeah. Well, it's. Can't. Countries get along and, it's because I've got to always be in power. You need to listen to me. I'm smarter than you are. You don't follow me, you're crazy or not. I think that's why a democratic government was so appreciated by Christians. And as we become more legalistic and more rule following, and I think that a lot of that is because we're getting away from having Christ as the center of our life.
yeah. Well, yeah, like you were saying earlier, invest in water resources. A lot of those Muslim countries have rich reserves of oil. And as oil becomes less and less of a commodity in the West, water is going to be a resource for that. I would predict that there's just going to be continued turmoil for some of those countries, especially if they're Sunni versus Shia. I don't know. They need that would be a good opportunity to go over and try to share the story of Jesus. But I think we'd end up like John the Baptist.
Yeah. The missionary that I had talk at church
Yeah,
one time, he and his wife are in a Muslim country, but he said in that part of the country, they appreciate them speaking about their faith, and because
that's good. That's
they
great.
think that they should, but he said it's still not accepted for a Muslim to accept their faith, but there are many people who are, basically have multi-gods, or they're not Muslims.
Sure. Yeah, well, I'm just speaking about the radicals.
Yeah.
I don't think that, I don't know. I think there's some really peace-loving Muslims out there, so.
Well, look back at all the radical Christians that killed each other too.
Yeah. And radicalism has infiltrated every philosophy and religion on planet Earth.
And the Catholics killed the Protestants, and the Protestants killed the Catholics, and many Christians killed the Indians because they wouldn't accept, you know, the Christian faith. And
It's hard to spread the gospel. It's hard to talk about a God who dies on the cross. You know, that's not, I mean, that's like, you just, is that your leadoff statement that Jesus died for you? Or is your leadoff, I think a better one is to just show them a Christian love and what that looks like to serve them, and then get into the, well, and Jesus served us and loved us so much that it actually cost him his life.
yeah, because their first thought is you've got a stupid God who
Yeah.
died.
Yeah, exactly. You have dumb God.
Yeah.
You have dumb God.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's, if you look at it from that angle and only that angle, then I can see where you would say that.
But it's, you know, you think of all the people in the early church who gave their life for Christianity. If Jesus wouldn't have been resurrected, if he wouldn't have appeared to him, everybody after he rose, why would you go out and give your life for a cause you knew was, you know, not right, not real?
You wouldn't.
Yeah. And every one of the apostles, other than John, was martyred, and, you know, many of his other followers. And, you know, it's not because they got a great life and got to live in palaces because they were Christians. It wasn't an easy life.
No.
All right, now that we solved all the problems here, we know everything.
Close the Lord's Prayer.
Sure.
Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses,
as
as we
we
forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, thanks.